So they just kind of stared at them for the first show, kind of like, wow, Negroes in tuxedos, playing horns. Yow. And then, after about an hour of that, the next set, they danced, right? But there's that moment. See, to me, that's like a signal moment about something in American society. That after all these minstrel shows and all that, right, to see Armstrong and Baby Dodds and Fate Marable and all of these other people in these tuxedos, beautifully dressed and playing this music, was like a shock. But again, they got used to it. And then they got out on the floor and tried to shake a tail feather, as it were. But that signal moment, I think, is something that tells us an enormous amount about what we were going to see more and more and more of in America.
A new awareness of black music was sweeping popular culture. Even composers who had until now preferred the polite traditions of European theatre bowed to its influence. Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein, both from Jewish families, now developed racial themes new to popular music.
Showboat, I think, is the single most important musical in the history of the American musical theater because it really marks a tremendous turning point. Never before had the American musical theater dealt with some of the themes that are inherent in Showboat. The intermarriage between people of two races, and then, too, the idea of a black and white cast appearing together in a Broadway show. Unheard of. And that they were singing together on the stage at the same time was even more remarkable. So Showboat was a work of tremendous danger. The racial attitudes in the original version of Showboat, which no one has seen since the late 1930s because the show has been rewritten so many times, I think is a very daring one. It opens with a phenomenal quatrain. Niggers all work on the Mississippi. Niggers all work while the white folks play, loading up boats with the bales of cotton, getting no rest till the judgment day. Imagine what this meant to 1920s audiences, that the curtain would go up on this gala first night in this brand new, gleaming, beautiful theater. People, women dripping in diamonds and men in their top hats, white ties, and tails, and seeing a chorus of black laborers lifting bales of cotton and singing that phenomenal quatrain. This was stunning, stupefying to those audiences. God, I hate political correctness. It always mucks up everything. And they keep changing niggers all work to darkies all work to colored folks work. Everything else I find racially denigrating. Niggers all work is the right word, because niggers is the word that those black people in the 1920s in the South that is being depicted in the show would use. Everything else looks like a liberal Caucasian's self-conscious acceptance of a situation they'd rather not be thinking about.
We sweat and strain, body all aching and rain.
Showboat's new realism is embodied in the song that later became an anthem for Paul Robeson in his struggle for civil rights.
You get a little drunk and your land's in jail. I get weary and sick of trying. I'm tired of living and scared of dying, but old man River, he just keeps rolling on.
So Broadway's portrayal of American society was changing. No more black minstrels and coon songs now. Irving Berlin, who'd always used his songs to make topical comments, wrote a new show based on tabloid headlines.
It's very interesting indeed that Berlin started in the early days selling newspapers, because in 1933 he wrote a musical show called As Thousands Cheer, the conceit of which was newspaper headlines for which he wrote songs for every scene. And he wrote every kind of song for that show. For the weather report he wrote, "We're having a heat wave, a tropical heat wave." So that was the weather page. He wrote the society page. "In your Easter bonnet," wrote that. Then there was a very poignant song, and there was a headline that said, "Black man lynched by mob," or "Negro man lynched by mob." And that's when Ethel Waters sang a song which was forever connected with her. Supper time, I must set the table, 'cause it's supper time. Somehow I ain't able, 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more. That's an extraordinary achievement for Broadway in 1933, to have a song like that performed when an audience was very accustomed to light entertainment, and suddenly they're confronted with a very important social issue that was largely neglected at that time. Certainly, Berlin was thinking about his own family's exodus from Russia, all of the pogroms and demonstrations against Jews that caused the mass exodus of all those people to America and other places. And so he certainly felt very deeply about what he was writing, and it certainly shows in that piece of music, because musically it is very sophisticated, very Gershwin-esque in its harmonies, and perfect for Ethel Waters.
Supper time, I must set the table, 'cause it's supper time. Somehow I ain't able, 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more. Supper time, kids will soon be yelling for their supper time. How'll I keep from telling them that man of mine ain't coming home no more?
That song is amazing because it was written for a specific thing. It was reflecting my father's feelings about an outrage. But it was also a most extraordinary song about loss.
Somehow I ain't able, 'cause that man of mine ain't coming home no more.
It was a very daring thing to do. He had to pay for it in many ways. The other stars in the show, one was Clifton Webb, refused to come out and bow with Ethel Waters at the end of the show. And they refused for a few times, and he heard about it and said from now on, there'll be no bows at all. And so, of course, they changed their minds, didn't they? There were, of course, racial situations, and we were living in an entirely segregated society in America. There was no open rebellion, but people were certainly talking about the inequity of that. And as a young black child, I simply took that on the chin. I thought, well, this is the way it has to be.
But Broadway itself was changing, and not just in its reflection of racial issues. Shows were closing by the dozen. The birth of the sound film offered a new big-screen realism.
I walk a million miles for one of your smiles, but my me.
And then came the Wall Street crash. The songwriters lost their theatres and their savings, but a saviour beckoned: Hollywood. The studios desperately needed more songs for their musicals. After buying up Tin Pan Alley and then the Broadway stars, they sent for Berlin, Gershwin and friends, and paid them handsomely.
Nothing but blue skies do I see. Oh, don't know, bluebirds singing a song. Nothing but...
Irving Berlin, once described as the toughest Jewish businessman I ever met, adapted easily to the demands of the Hollywood moguls.
Never saw things going so right. Noticing the day.
While enjoying the good life, this songwriting chameleon ran off a string of hits for the new superstars of Hollywood. All 5 of Berlin's songs for the movie topped the new radio hit parade as the early pop music business spread its wings across America.
Why, I'm listening to the radio theater.
Gentlemen, you're about to be interviewed.
Wait till I fix my tie.
Don't you like being interviewed?
Well, I don't mind, as long as you don't ask us which we write first, the words or the music.
The Broadway songwriters had become celebrities in their own right. Soon others arrived in Hollywood: Richard Rodgers and Larry Hart. They'd been rocketed to fame by their earlier hit, Manhattan.
The city's noises cannot describe
The dreams of a boy and girl will turn
Manhattan
into
an isle
of joy.
Rodgers and Hart depicted in a newsreel the frustrations of songwriters hired and fired by the Philistines of Hollywood.
It's all your fault. My fault? All you did was talk about your lyrics. Why didn't you let me play the music for him? I'm sick of this racket. Now you'll have to go into the real estate business with your father. Come on.
Lorenz Hart was unhappy. He wrote a song with Rodgers called Glad to Be Unhappy, but I don't think he was glad to be unhappy at all. He suffered terribly, and it became impossible in the end for Rodgers to keep working with him because he drank too much and he just wasn't reliable.
And no one was more fed up with the Hollywood songwriting racket than George Gershwin, who hated losing control of his music to soulless movie producers. Despite his glamorous lifestyle, he desperately needed a new musical challenge uncompromised by Hollywood's seductive money-making machine. In 1934, Gershwin began rehearsals for an ambitious stage production painstakingly researched in the Gullah Negro community of South Carolina.
He liked to know things from the inside. And so he had a real emotional involvement with something. I mean, when he went south, I mean, he'd go to the churches and sing along with the church people in the churches. He'd go to the dances and dance. He would clap his hands. He'd get loud. He was an aggressive guy. He'd get all the way in there because he wanted to find out what that felt like in the middle of it. But in order to avoid the kind of simple-minded stuff that people engage in today that has nothing to do with the aesthetic process in which they talk about this white man stole this from that black person, this black person stole this from that white person. All artists who are serious steal. So if you're a serious artist and you don't steal, you need to be in another business. See, if you're a serious artist, you seek out the very best thing that you can find and you snatch as much of that and put it in your stuff as you can. Now, if you have sufficient talent, you will remake that, and people will begin to recognize that that's your version of it. See, that's why Gershwin was absolutely fearless.
Porgy and Bess would